Welcome back, everyone. Well, tomorrow is election day, and it looks like right now, at least, we'll see where it goes, but Republicans are predicted to pretty much have a red wave right now. They are predicted to flip both the House and the Senate. And you see some interesting phenomena taking place right now, which is it looks like Democrats are kind of setting it up to throw Biden under the bus, which is interesting to watch. You have the legacy news outlets, the big corporate media, fact checking Joe Biden. They're really going after him. Washington Post is even calling for him to not run again for president. I'll give my take on what this means because I have my kind of theories about what they're up to. It's purely my opinion, but I'll get into that. It's very strange what's happening. That said, as well, there's kind of an election integrity movement behind the Republicans. Trump is one of the big figures involved with that. They're getting poll watchers in place. And of course, this is to mitigate a lot of the concerns people have that there's going to be voter fraud. Now, Democrats are saying that that action in itself constitutes a type of voter intimidation. So I'll explain what's going on with that. They're framing this idea that you want to have 50-50 balance, 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. As poll watchers, Democrats are saying that that's like interfering with the elections. I'll talk about that, but also explain to you what's actually happening to ensure, to monitor the polls, to make sure things are not going wrong, because there's actually a lot taking place right now that really hasn't gotten that much attention. And also, folks, I'm going to get into what's happening in Brazil, because what's happening there could actually impact what's happening here. There are mass protests. I mean, millions and millions of people out on the streets protesting all throughout the country. I've heard around 300 different areas of Brazil. Protesting all throughout the country. And they're calling, interestingly, in Brazil, for the military to intervene to do a rapid audit of the election. It's actually very similar to what Trump was allegedly trying to do right ahead of January 6th. And it's unclear whether Bolsonaro is actually going to do anything. Currently, he's not really giving a sign of that. He is not conceding the election, but he's also moving forward with the transition. So Brazil is kind of in a similar place to, well, last days of Trump in office right now, essentially. But I want to show you all something that people maybe haven't talked about, which is a very strange series of articles that really didn't get nearly enough coverage, in my opinion. That Joe Biden and his administration actually were involved with the elections in Brazil. You may have heard this, you may have not. The Biden administration was involved with the elections in Brazil. And this is raising some issues around, well, the article we saw in Time magazine soon after the 2020 presidential election, where Time magazine talks about how the deep state and social media and big tech companies and so on, how they fortified the 2020 election, how they took actions to ensure that there quote-unquote wasn't any fraud. It's interesting to note that same thing just happened in Brazil, and it was actually the same, well, there's the U.S. government under Biden who did it. I'll go into all this, folks. First, though, let's jump into what's happening with the Republicans looking to flip both the House and the Senate. I want to show you some of the polls on this. Real quick, those of you on YouTube, those of you on Rumble, we will jump over exclusively to Epic TV after about 25 minutes, so please join us there. Again, there's a lot of stuff we can't talk about on YouTube. In fact, I probably can't go into, I don't think I can talk about the Brazil elections on here. I saw that people were getting their videos banned on YouTube for going into that, so come join us on Epic TV for that. That said, though, folks, again, Epic TV, uncensored platform, we can actually show stuff like that you can't show on YouTube. That's important to show, so come join us there. Again, I do an hour-and-a-half show, only about 25 minutes is on YouTube. All right, first, folks, let's talk about what's happening with the polling and where things are at right now. Let me show you Epic Times. It had a story, Republicans now favored to take the Senate. They're citing 538, but also this cites multiple different polls, all showing basically the same thing. It says, polling analytics website 5038 predicted that the Republican Party is favored to take the Senate. In other words, not just the House, but also the Senate, as it shifted its previous toss-up prediction for the upper chamber. The publication as of Saturday night lists Republicans' odds of winning the Senate at 55 in 100, as opposed to Democrats' 45 in 100 chances. It says several days before that, it said that the Senate is in a dead heat. Republicans, it added, have a 54 in 100 chance of winning both the House and the Senate, while Democrats have a 30 in 100 chance of winning the Senate and losing the House. Overall, it says the GOP, Republican Party, has an 84 in 100 chance of recapturing the House. Real Clear Politics meanwhile projected the GOP has a higher likelihood of reclaiming the Senate following next Tuesday's election. This was last week, possibly taking as many as 54 seats in the Democrats' 46 seats. To the Democrats' 46 seats. Republicans are favored by the aggregator to win the seats in Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. And further, it says a poll released last week discovered that 36% of voters see inflation as the number one issue, far outpacing the number two choice, abortion, which garnered only 10%. Followed by the Supreme Court's decision in June to reverse Roe v. Wade, Democrats have made abortion one of the top campaign priorities. In other words, folks, the thing most voters care about by far, which would be the economy, is what Democrats are doing the worst on. The things that really voters don't care that much about, abortion 10%, is what the Democrats have been mostly pushing. Meaning they haven't really been moving beyond their base. And even among their base, they're actually losing a lot of supporters because people care more about what's affecting their basic livelihoods in the moment. Now, going on with this, a Wall Street Journal post also found that suburban women are swinging towards Republicans. They voted heavy Democrat, in the past. Republicans now, so it says that about 15%. They have about a 15% lead is going Republican. Democrats lost about 27 percentage points with suburban women. And Latin American voters are also flipping Republican. You also have a pretty good shift among black voters as well, but especially among Latin American voters. Now, what this kind of shows us is something interesting, taken as a whole right now. Now, keep in mind, polling data is just polling data. This is polling data that predicted Trump had like a 5% chance of winning in 2016. Polls are not totally reliable. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And polls, well, interestingly, tend to favor Democrats a whole lot more than Republicans. And so even while we're showing the data on this, the polling actually is probably skewed more in favor of Democrats than Republicans, just being honest, meaning it actually might be even more so in favor of Republicans than even what we're talking about. Now, getting into the issues at hand, though, something is interesting, which is I just mentioned that Latin American voters are flipping, women voters are flipping, black voters are flipping. All are kind of turning Republican. You have this shift within the normal Democrat base that is shifting towards Republican. And it's interesting, actually, how they're framing the shift, particularly among Latin American voters. First of all, the women voters is interesting because I think Democrats kind of they hedged their bets on the idea that women would care a whole lot more about abortion. And that was kind of their bid to get the Democrat voters to get the suburban women. It didn't work. It didn't work. Women care a whole lot more about the school trying to castrate their child than they do about abortion, apparently. They care more about the basic livelihoods of their families than they do about abortion, apparently. And essentially, that's what the polls are showing right now. Yes, you do have some who definitely do care about abortion and so on like that, but it's not. It doesn't go beyond the Democrat base, and even beyond the base of that, some of them care a whole lot more about basic livelihood issues, which Democrats are doing very badly on. On the note of the Latin American voters, this is interesting because the basis of the attempt of the Biden administration to form this whole Ministry of Truth. Remember, they tried to create this disinformation governance board. The basis of that was they claimed there was disinformation and misinformation being spread among Latin American communities. And they said that, they need to fight this. Well, it's interesting right now that the Democrats say they're losing the Latin American voting base because they claim there's misinformation among the Latin American, being spread among them. which does give some credence to the idea that the whole purpose of that disinformation governance board was actually election related and was actually meant to be basically, the propaganda wing of the Democrat Party, where they wanted to, kind of challenge these narratives that were flipping Latin Americans to vote Republican. Let me show you. CNN had the story, so I'll show you what CNN had to say about it. CNN says, spread of election lies in Florida's Spanish-speaking communities is fracturing democratic institutions, advocates warn. And it says, with voting already underway in this year's midterm, election lies and QAnon conspiracy theories. Keep in mind, QAnon conspiracy theories these days are just like a Trojan horse of pretty much any conspiracy theories, because they claim that was like the meta conspiracy theory. Any kind of thing, whether you're talking about like Pizzagate or you're talking about child abuse rings or Jeffrey Epstein, or anything that's, even as far as I've read into it, not even related to it, is considered that. So if a person believes in any of these things, it's called a QAnon conspiracy, which is the blanket term they're now using to write off pretty much everything. But they say election lies and QAnon conspiracy theories are circulating among Spanish-speaking communities, raising alarm bells for advocates that it could discourage Latinos from voting and further divide communities. Keep in mind, it's probably, in my opinion, it's not going to discourage them from voting. It's probably going to discourage them from voting Democrat. There's a big difference there. But keep in mind the narrative of the Democrat establishment, right? The narrative they're using is voter intimidation and preventing people from voting. And so rather than saying they're going to vote Republican, they're saying it's going to discourage them from voting. And that's the narrative they're using, basically, right? So they're claiming, essentially CNN is going off this agenda narrative, right? Where they're claiming that the spread of disinformation, as they're framing it, right? They're framing it as that, and they're saying that because they've been misled, they're being intimidated from voting. This is the narrative the establishment is using to try to censor information online, right? That's the excuse they're using for their censorship or pushing for censorship, which is just divorced from reality. It's not true. But anyways, further in it says this. The impact of disinformation has been especially acute in South Florida with its large Spanish-speaking community, foreign-born population, and significant political influence. And it says something interesting. Get this. It says, ahead of the midterms, the main false narrative is about alleged widespread fraud in the 2020 presidential election. You don't say. And it says, this information is often similar in English and Spanish. And it says this team has identified specific subjects particularly targeted at the Latino population, including, they say, falsehoods that the Biden administration is a socialist communist regime, which is sensitive for people who came from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua because of those countries' history, she said. Well, maybe it's because they have like socialist and communist grassroots organizations that are like the main supporters of them, especially if you go to like South Florida and you look at the activist groups who are like the mobilized grassroots wing of the Democrat Party. Folks, like, okay, I know a lot of Cubans. They regard, and you see the same thing in Chinese and so on. They regard the Democrats as being socialist. And the Democrats have not disavowed the socialist wing like the AOCs and so on, who's openly socialist, or Bernie Sanders, who is openly socialist. They're trying to claim now, and not only have they not disavowed them, but again, they're aligning their politics heavily with them because they don't want to lose that base. The Democrats absolutely have become a socialist party. They're adopting socialist policies. They practice many socialist systems, and they have in no way disavowed their own socialist grassroots, which has become essentially like the dominating crying child in the corner that they're trying to appease at every moment. Again, the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the crowd. If you talk to most Cubans, they see it this way. If you talk to Venezuelans, they see it this way, and I've talked to many of them. If you talk to Chinese Americans, they see it this way. They'll point to Antifa, and to them, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, to them, it looks like the Little Red Guard. It looks like the same people during the Cultural Revolution who were going around smashing temples and burning down buildings and destroying ancient artifacts, and who were killing landlords and killing teachers and beating people on the streets. They look like the same thing to them. And the narrative they used was almost the same, which was destroy the four olds. They were destroying old cultures, old beliefs, old habits, essentially destroying what they considered to be the rightist or conservative movement in the country, the people who wanted to hold on to the traditional values. That was the target. If you talk about globalism, to most people who've lived under communism, globalism and the Communist International are the same thing. When they hear globalism, they think Communist International because they grew up learning about it and they grew up being told that was the agenda. People who've grown up under these systems know what these things look like, and they look at what's happening here and they say, hey, I've seen this before. It's the exact same thing. And the Democrats, interestingly, in their base, they're claiming that people viewing this, that fundamental historical view to compare to what's happening right now, that in itself is being caused by what they claim is disinformation, telling people that somehow this is all socialist, and somehow trying to disavow the fact that Democrats have embraced socialism, unfortunately. Anyways, it's a bunch of nonsense. But the basis of this is, right, the basis of this is that they're losing that voting base. And that's going to have a huge impact tomorrow when people do cast their votes, unless they've been early voting, they've already done it. Meanwhile, Biden is actually saying Democrats are going to win. But it's interesting what's happening with that. I want to show you some of this, folks. Basically, Biden is talking about the economy and how great it's doing. He's being called out by his own base for lying. And I have a lot of thoughts on why that's happening. I think they're going to throw Biden under the bus. I don't think they want Biden to run again. I'm going to explain in a bit. First, the folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not ask for your phone number, mine your data, or upload your contacts. Now, folks, it's $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, and only $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big things out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Now, let me explain to you what's happening with Biden. Biden is getting fact-checked by Twitter, by CNN, by New York Times. The Washington Post is asking him to not run for president again. Why are they doing that ahead of the elections? Why? Think about that. In what way would it serve the Democrat Party's interest to throw the head of the Democrat Party under the bus right before the midterms? Like, in what way would that serve their interest? Keep in mind, when you're dealing with these establishment media, almost everything has to fall in line with that lockstep agenda, right? They're like just marching in line and they can't veer off from it. If they do veer off from it too far, their own base attacks them. They start losing subscribers and it just tears them apart. And they tend to march in lockstep. And you see them marching in lockstep, interestingly. You see all the establishment media, New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, so on and so on, basically having the same basic narrative. They have suddenly started to attack Joe Biden. They've started to suddenly go after him. And they're going after him again at a very sensitive time for their party where it in no way serves their political interest to go after the head of their party right when they're really, based on polls, set to lose control of both the House and the Senate. Why are they doing that? Now, one thing you could say is, well, maybe they had a streak of honesty and they decided, hey, maybe it's time to start fact-checking people. Or you could say, no, there's probably an agenda behind it. And I'd lean on the side of saying, no, there's probably an agenda behind it. The agenda, in my opinion, is that they don't want Biden to run again for president. They don't believe they can win with him. And I believe they also believe, in my opinion, that they don't have a chance in the midterms. They're going to take the loss on the chin. Once they do lose, they're going to throw Biden under the bus, say it's all his fault, and they're going to try to get someone else to step in. One of the people who they're talking about is Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California. Which we'll see how that plays out. Let me explain to you what's happening with this, though. Now, Biden is getting fact-checked by the corporate media, specifically lying about the economy. Again, remember, we talked about the main points the Democrats have tried getting behind. The two big things they tried getting behind was this idea of radicalism. Joe Biden is still big on that, claiming that the MAGA Republicans are a threat to democracy, and keeps going on that note. He gave his red speech. He just gave another one, basically saying the same thing, and saying he's going to go after them and so on. Right? This is their last chance. He actually said that. That's one of the big narratives that they tried using. January 6th, so on and so on. Right? The other side is talking about abortion. Neither of those have gotten their voting base behind them. Neither of those have galvanized voters. The polling data shows that outside of the really deep blue base, about 10%, which are mostly the more extreme, the more kind of hardened Democrats who are not going to flip anyways, outside of them, it's not winning people over. The thing that's winning people over is the economy. And it's interesting that leading up to the election, only just very recently, Biden has just been lying and lying and lying about the economy specifically. And it's interesting now that the establishment media is actually calling him out for it repeatedly. Let me show you. This is one of them. CNBC said this October 21st. They said Biden predicts, well, this is about Biden predicting things. Let me show you where he's at first. Biden, it says, is predicting that Democrats' odds will improve as the midterm elections approach, and he's citing economic improvements. So Biden believes that Democrats are going to win. You may have seen some stories around this. Keep in mind that as he's saying that, he's doing that on the basis that he is saying the economy is improving. The problem with that narrative is that he's being called out for lying about the economy improving. In other words, the basis of him saying Democrats have a chance is based on a lie that he's being called out on by his own base. It says President Joe Biden predicted Friday that voters will swing back to favor Democrats in the remaining weeks before the midterm elections as concerns over the economy ease, which they haven't. It says back and forth with them ahead, us ahead, them ahead, back and forth. The polls have been all over the place, Biden said, speaking at the White House. And Biden also said, I think that we're going to see a lot more shift back to our side in the closing days. It says further in that polls have recently favored Republicans as concerns over the economy have eclipsed abortion. A New York Times Siena College report released Monday found voters favor Republican control of Congress by a margin of 4 percentage points. The poll found economic topics like the stock market and jobs were voters' top issues, as 26% said it was their biggest concern, followed by inflation at 18%, abortion, and immigration, each with only 5%. People don't care about it. And it says approval for Biden generally and his handling of the economy rose in the third quarter, according to CNBC. And it said with each improving 10 percentage points from the poll in July, the survey found respondents favored Republicans over Democrats to control Congress, blah, blah, blah. I won't go too far into it. What's the problem with that? The problem, folks, is that even Biden is now, again, being fact-checked over his claim that the economy is actually improving. The entire foundation of the argument, in other words, is moot. The entire foundation of the argument that Democrats have a chance to win back, at least keep the House, or keep the Senate at the very least, and not lose the House. Keep the House and not lose the Senate. I'm sorry. The very basis of that is founded on the idea that the economy is improving. The whole argument that Biden is using on all of this is that he believes the economy is improving. The problem with that, again, is he's lying. He's been lying. And I can just say directly he's been lying because his own base is also saying it. It's not just, this isn't even a partisan issue now. This isn't a partisan issue to say Joe Biden is lying about the economy. He's being fact-checked by people on Twitter. He's being fact-checked by most of the establishment. He's being fact-checked by media on the right and on the left. The Hill has one story. Let me show you this. The Hill says Twitter users flag Biden tweet on gas prices. And it's interesting, The Hill actually buries the actual data at the very, very bottom of their article. You have to go through it talks about some of the nuances and so on, but only at the very bottom does it say this. The Hill says, today the most common price of gas in America is $3.39, if you take the whole country, right? This is Biden saying this. Today, the most common price of gas in America is $3.39, down from $5 when I took office. That's what Biden said. Biden's claiming that when he took office, gas was $5, across the whole nation. Now it's $3.39. Look at what a success he's made, killing off the oil industry. It says, but fact checkers were quick to clarify that the most common price for a gallon of gas was actually much cheaper when he took office. The average price across the whole country was $2.39. And CNN actually had that as well. Note that it was CNN that fact checked him. CNN fact checked Joe Biden. And they didn't just fact check him on that. Let me show you this article from CNN. CNN has a whole big fact check, and they say fact check Biden's midterm message includes false and misleading claims. It says President Joe Biden has been back in the campaign. This is CNN, folks. President Joe Biden is back in the campaign trail, traveling in October and early November to deliver his pitch for electing Democrats in the midterm elections on Tuesday. Biden's pitch has included claims that are false, misleading, or lacking important context. That's CNN talking about the head of the Democrat Party. And as always, they're saying they take no positions on the accuracy of his subjective arguments. I don't know if that's what they always do, but it says they go over 9 different statements from Biden and show how he basically lied on 9 different points. On that, they note Biden also made false claims on Social Security savings, the corporate tax, the deficit, debt, unemployment, the unemployment rate, his student debt relief policy, Xi Jinping, and he also lied about Trump's tax cuts. They fact-check him on all those things. Now, keep in mind the nature of all those topics I just went over that they fact-checked him on. Almost, except for China, almost every one of those is about the economy. Biden, as being fact-checked by CNN, The Hill, New York Times, all these other media, Biden is specifically lying about the economy. Why is he specifically lying about the economy? Because that's what Democrats know that voters want. That's what voters care about. And he's lying about it because the truth does not look good for the Democrats. Biden is specifically lying about the economy because the truth does not help him. The truth is very, very damaging to them, and the truth is probably going to make them lose come tomorrow. Even the New York Times is fact-checking Biden on his claims, again, specifically about the economy. Let me show you this. New York Times says, as elections approach, Biden spins his economic record, which is not a big record to spin, I should note. It says, as President Biden has told it in recent months, America has the fastest growing economy in the world. His student debt forgiveness program passed Congress by a vote of 2, and Social Security benefits became more generous thanks to his leadership. None of that was accurate. Folks, this is New York Times saying this. None of that was accurate. The president, who has long been seen as embellishing the truth, has recently overstated his influence on the economy or omitted key facts. This week, Mr. Biden praised himself for giving retirees a raise during a Florida speech. And, of course, he was called out for lying about that, right? It says it's in stops across the country in recent weeks. Biden has also credited himself with bringing down the federal budget deficit, the gap between what America owes and what it earns. Keep in mind, folks, the deficit now, we're paying more in interest than the entire defense budget. America, because they've spent so much of our money and got us so badly in debt, the United States now every year is paying more money in interest on our debts than our entire defense budget. But Biden is saying he's fixing the problem. And New York Times is noting that, quote, left unsaid was the fact that the deficit was so high in the first place because of pandemic relief spending, including a $1.9 trillion economic aid package the president pushed through Congress in 2021, which was not renewed. Mr. Biden was in effect claiming credit for not passing another round of emergency assistance. Let me give my take on this, and then we'll jump over to Epic TV, but I want to close this out. My take, folks, my take is that Democrats know they can't save themselves when it comes to Biden's economy. They know that voters care about the economy. They know it's the biggest issue. They're trying to separate Biden from the Democrat Party. They're trying to distance. This is my opinion, right? They're trying to distance Biden from the Democrat Party, and they're making Biden the individual responsible for this, not the party, not the establishment, but Biden specifically. They know that voters care the most about economy, which is why Biden is very specifically lying about the economy. And these hard left news outlets are even turning on Joe Biden now. Now, why would they turn on Joe Biden? They likely know that Joe Biden has lost even on Democrat voters. They know that Joe Biden has essentially lost his base. And how does that help them in the midterms? Why attack the head of the president, but also the head of the Democrat Party? Why attack him ahead of the midterms when all these establishment groups, they're very obviously, partisan. They want their party to win. Why attack him ahead of the midterms when doing so would basically be attacking their own party? It's because by separating Biden from the Democrats, they're making it seem like Biden is the one responsible, not the candidates who they might elect. Do you see what I mean? They're separating Biden's identity. They're packaging and placing all the different economic problems on Joe Biden's head, saying, look, this guy's responsible for it. He's lying about it. It's him. It's not the party. It's not the candidates. It's not the people you might elect in the midterms. This is their way of separating the two. And outlets including New York Times and CNN and many others are turning on Joe Biden, likely, in my opinion, because they don't want him to run again also in 2024. So this is a two-tiered thing. They know Biden doesn't have the weight behind him to win against, say, a Donald Trump or even maybe a Ron DeSantis. They know he doesn't have, they know his cognitive, I assume they know that his cognitive state is very bad right now and it's getting worse. They see this, right? And given this situation, I do think they're trying to not only, again, distance the party from him in terms of identity at a very key time for that, but also, again, try to make sure he doesn't run again, because that would happen right after the midterms. And on that note, let me show you some evidence of my analysis. The Washington Post actually had an opinion piece basically stating this. Washington Post, folks, a very, in my opinion, far-left media under Jeff Bezos, says for the good of the country, Biden and Harris should bow out of the 2024 election. And Washington Post itself states, during this autumn's avalanche of political news, an enormous boulder bounced by, barely noticed. It demonstrated why Joe Biden should not seek another term. Democrats should promptly face that fact. And this one. An Everest of evidence shows that Vice President Harris is starkly unqualified to be considered as his successor. In 2024, it says further in, the Republican Party might present the nation with a presidential nominee whose unfitness has been demonstrated. They're basically saying Trump is probably going to run again. And on that note, Trump is expected to he's alleged to make his announcement of his 2024 run roughly, I think on the 14th. So I think Newsweek said the 14th, but we'll see what happens. And they say after next Tuesday's sobering election results, Democrats should resolve not to insult and imperil the nation by doing likewise. Doing likewise as in putting forward candidates who they say are unfit to run for office. They're saying Biden and Harris are unfit to be president, because if Biden has to step down, it's going to be Harris, right? It's incredible, folks. So anyways, that's kind of where I see things at with the midterms and going into it. The other big thing is going to be election integrity. And there's some stuff happening with that. I know people are worried about this. I know there's a lot of concerns about this, but there's some really important information specifically around the actions Republicans have actually taken that really have not gotten much attention, where they've essentially, fortified the elections. Use their own term for it. Republicans have put in place a system that will make fraud very, very difficult. Very difficult. And Democrats are saying that constitutes interference in the elections, which is the Biden DOJ is probably going to end up investigating it after this, but it won't matter that much. It's just going to be political drama and so on. But I want to tell you what's happening with that, with the election integrity issue, with the poll watchers, with Trump's election army, as they're framing it, because this is one of the most consequential things in terms of the ability to have your vote counted. And I know that's one of the big concerns most people have, including myself. There's actually been a lot done on this. So let me explain to you what that is. For that part, though, we have to jump over to Epic TV because YouTube really does not like us talking about this. So, folks, come join us on Epic TV, where we won't get censored, where there's free speech, where you can chat and speak freely and breathe the fresh air of freedom with all of us. Come over to Epic TV now. And again, I do an hour-and-a-half show. Only about 25 minutes, roughly, is on YouTube. I'll see you over on Epic TV. First, though, folks, let me show you a quick trailer. Jan Jekielek on his show, American Thought Leaders, had a great interview with Dr. Meryl Nass. It's about more vaccine deaths reported to VAERS in the last 20 months than all vaccines in the last 30 years combined. Let me show you this trailer, then we'll jump over to Epic TV.
The FDA was instructed by a federal judge to revoke the license because it had never been shown to be safe or effective.
Dr. Meryl Nass, a physician of internal medicine, began her research into pandemics 30 years ago with a focus on anthrax vaccines and biological warfare. From the Rhodesian Civil War to the 2009 swine flu, she says she saw a profit-driven push for mass vaccination. In many cases, they bypassed adequate testing and modified or attempted to bury data, she says.
WHO had changed the pandemic definitions a couple of months before the 2009 swine flu pandemic showed up. So you didn't need deaths anymore to trigger these contracts. It could just be a new virus.
Today, Dr. Nass is one of many doctors whose medical license is being threatened for deviating from official COVID guidelines during the pandemic.
If all you're good for is to give patients the government narrative, there's not going to be any practice of medicine anymore.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
Again, folks, that's exclusively on Epic TV. And that said, I will see you on Epic TV for the rest of the show. Let's jump over now. All right, folks, real quick. So